Trying a little something different here. Got a more of a podcast format. We got Nik Dommen here. Look alive, Nik. Look alive.
I'm alive.
We got Nik. You may recognize him from the Enduro review, but Nik's a good buddy, fellow racer. We'll talk about stuff that is exciting and interesting to us, so might be interesting to you too. I thought we'd start by talking about two bike releases that happened in the last couple days, the Scott Ransom and the new Noli Chicolton. It's interesting seeing new bikes come out and kind of where companies are targeting and picking them apart. So what do you think?
I think they're just the Scott, I think, is decent, but definitely could benefit from, at least in my opinion, this is my opinion, could definitely benefit from, at least in the size large, on a longer chainstay, which seems to be a theory or trend with a lot of bikes that come out. Is some brands seem to really nail it and go with a more proportionate front to rear, whereas like that Scott doesn't. I imagine it just has to do with manufacturing and not making a bunch of different rear end lengths, but I don't know. I also, for the record, I ride a Scott Ransom e-ride, so an e-bike. My e-bike is a Scott Ransom, so I'm not just taking a dump on the bike. Like, that honestly is one of my favorite bikes I've ever owned, and the only bike I've, other than an Iron Horse Sunday and a dirt jumper, that I've kept for more than a year. So, like, if it wasn't good, I wouldn't have kept it. So it's just strange to me that Scott made that bike and it happens to be like really good, and then you look at other bikes and you're like, it's all right. So that's kind of how I feel with that Ransom. Is like, it's like, you were really close, so like, finish it out. That's just what I see. Like, I'm sure, like, it's close, it's like, other than like cables to their headset, like, come on guys, like.
I don't think we need to spend much time on that. That's
like, nobody wants
that. Most people can agree on. Not tight, but it's interesting. I think it's cool that size proportionate chainstays seem to be like becoming something like that consumers are looking at and asking for. I think it's taken a while to get there, and I think it almost makes it like more interesting when bikes come out with just a standard chainstay size, all the way through the sizes. When you look at the size large, which is generally where we're at, I'm like 6'1", you're what, like 5'11"? 440 chainstay, reach 483. So I don't know, it's just nothing new or exciting geometry wise. Like, so many bikes fall into that 440, 480 something reach category in the large, and I feel like we both have ridden enough bikes with that setup to know that for our riding styles, this is all opinion based. It's just not super inspiring. And then I feel like as average bike riders, all the integration, like, you can't help but like be slightly concerned about that, but you can't really make a judgment on that without riding the bike for like a year. So it's cool that they're trying something new, but as like new and exciting as that bike looks, there's honestly like nothing that crazy going on. I think also something interesting is that everyone's moving to 6-bar. Like, any new bike coming out, I mean, not any new bike, but you just see more and more brands moving to 6-bar.
But it is interesting that like, every bike, it's like, it used to be 4-bar with a rocker link, and now it's 6-bar. So what's next? 8?
Yeah.
I don't know what we're gonna do there, but
and then the Noli. We were briefly talking about this earlier, but the Noli seems like it may have been designed like pre-COVID, when everyone thought long reaches were the answer to everything, because we're working with some pretty extremo numbers here on the Noli. And I mean, visually, like, it just looks like every single one of their other bikes, which some people are like really stoked on. You can call it core or whatever, but for a size medium, we're in 483 range. So exactly the same as the Scott large. And it's just like, all right, do we just rename sizes or?
I mean, as a normal, so I'd say I'm like a medium-sized human, or like large medium-sized human. Like, I would not ride a large with 500 mil reach. Like, that would be, I don't know. I mean, that would be, my core is not that strong. Let's just put it that way. Like, you're in like a plank.
Yeah. I mean, especially with, I mean, a large 509 and it's a 446 chainstay. I mean, those are honestly like somewhat similar numbers reach wise to the Nikolai,
Geometron.
to the
Yeah.
Geometron. But, you know, I at least have like a 460 something chainstay on there. But yeah, it just puts it in a weird category. And it's like the medium, like, dude, so many bikes fall in this in like S4 enduro geometry category, like 483 reach, 442 chainstay. Like that just seems to be like the go-to vanilla freaking a la carte bike geometry these days. And I don't know. I think we're going to talk about some bikes we are like really inspired by or like would love to ride later. Um, and it would just be like exciting to see like companies kind of depart from that because yeah, just I mean, name a bike brand that's like any sort of mainstream or you see on the trail and like the size large or the size medium nowadays, you know, choose one probably has that geometry number and it's like I think there's more on the table.
It seems like I think Canyon was one of the first like bigger brands to do like the crazy big sizing. That's just something that I remember. Like I think their let's see, I think like their enduro bike went from the same thing where it was like you just basically moved every size down and everything just got way bigger. Once you know, like if I just don't this is my opinion, but I don't feel like a size large should have like a reach of like 500. That's like insane. Um, I mean, it might work for some people, but I just don't think it's very practical. And you,
I'm just like curious like what's the driving factor behind it? Like I wonder if it's like a perceived demand from the consumer. Um that's been like quantified in any real way or if it's like from the engineering side and like the design initiative from the brand that's like we really believe this is better. So I wonder if it's like more of being like a people pleaser and like catering to a market or yeah, like trying to push something that like they believe is actually better. But I mean, in Canyon's case, it was pretty funny to watch the whole Jack Moore last year on Canyon when that new bike got released and Jack's 6'3" or something. I don't know. He's a tall, lanky dude, and fool was
kind of
riding the
small.
small.
Yeah, like what?
It's
Yeah, when
like,
the
damn.
size small is the same as your old medium or large, like
Yeah, it's like,
that's.
damn, did that marketing ploy like or did that marketing initiative really come full circle when your flagship enduro racer is pretty much saying, "Nah, I ain't stoked on this." Like, give me the
I,
small.
I, I don't think he was involved in development. If
Yeah,
that's
I
the
mean
case, like that's pretty clear.
that's really what it says is that Jack had no part in the development of that bike, which
They're
is
like,
like,
"Here's the bike, have fun." He's like, "Mate, I can't ride this."
yeah, sorry, bro, I'm out. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting when you think about it. It's like I guess he maybe wasn't a part of the brand long enough to like really be that entrenched in the development. Like I forget how long he was on.
I mean,
So
he
maybe
was
that
kind of a last minute pickup too. I think it was like this emergency, like he got kind of burned
yeah.
by Cannondale, I think, and then yeah, it's cool if Canyon to pick him up. I mean, I bet
Yeah.
honestly, like that the super big bike was probably like already like slated because I think brands are like years in advance,
Yeah, right.
so it's like
Yeah.
that bike might have been coming before like as he was picked up. So it's like
Yeah.
there's not.
Yeah, I think that's what it probably was then. It's just the bike was already decided on. Not much room for adjustment when he
Yeah,
came
on the
along, but
topic of that dude, the bike that he won that overall on is to me just a mystery. Like, although it isn't though, because if you look at like I can't figure out exactly like the numbers of it, but like I think it is in that range of kind of like almost what like an S3 Enduro is.
yeah.
Granted, he is way taller than like what I am, but
Yeah.
also like very skilled, way more skilled and fast, but still like it is like it. I think it actually like does work on paper. If you, but it was strange. Like that bike looked very odd.
I mean, I think it's something that is relevant to like all these conversations is that riding style just plays a massive factor in how you're going to set up your bike and like Jack Moore is a really good example of that. Like, you wouldn't tell anyone to set your bike up like Jack Moore and expect it to be good. It's like, that's a setup that I think it's honestly really cool that he's like been able to figure out like a setup that works for him. That's like pretty out in left field, as far as like normal, like the conventional knowledge of bike setup goes. And I think looking at him ride, he he's not really, and it's really hard to say, but he's not super over the front guy, like
No.
initiating with the front. Like, you look at him ride and it's like he's drifting everywhere, and like he's pretty much steering with the rear.
Yeah.
And I think he's been able to make a bike setup work that isn't super front grip heavy, and he's just a it just meshes with his riding style and his lanky legs. And like, it's kind of a mystery, but I feel like I can kind of make sense of it. But he's very much like found something that like works for him. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what colors the entire, bike geometry debate, is like what works for you. I feel like there's, when talking about the majority of most riders that aren't on the top end of enduro speed worldwide, I think there's still general principles that like can help most bikes perform for the majority of people in the majority of situations. So it's definitely still worth talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, like there is like yeah, it's hard to say. I think, yeah, if you're just within a certain range, it just makes your life as a rider or racer a lot easier.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
outside of that, then you have to start, you might get some big benefits, but then there's going to be like a big compromise with that benefit. So trying to avoid, at least in my opinion, like avoiding those so that you're not having to like work around something that's not good to
Yeah.
to me is ideal.
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting bikes, but not inspiring bikes that have come out in the last 2 days. So it's just always interesting to see where the trends are taking us. And yeah, but with that being said, I think we can move on to some bikes that do excite us. I think a question that I've gotten a few times in the comments is, yeah, like what bike would you buy right now? What's cool out there? And I don't have enough money to buy and test all of them, but we can at least talk about
Be
them.
sweet.
Yeah,
Which bike you want to
yeah,
ride to? Let's go ride that
would
one.
love to. But yeah, there's some bikes I definitely want to cover. Yeah, one of the bikes that I want to talk about is the Banshee Titan. I think it's like maybe one of the most underrated bikes out there right now. And me and Nick both have experience on this bike. This is the bike that kind of maybe started my interest in bike geometry and like really dissecting performance, especially from a geometry perspective.
So how'd you get to buying the Titan? Why? What led to the decision to get a hold of a Banshee Titan? I think that is the why is important
Yeah, the
because the resulting learning from that is, what got to this basically whole geometry principle and general idea.
yeah. Well, the definition of insanity is, doing something over and over again, expecting a different result.
Tucking
And
the front.
and I had just tucked the front so many times. I tucked the front so many times, dude. Yeah, so I mean that's the gist of it. Really, is I was tired of crashing, and I was tired of my front end washing out. I had the last generation Firebird, and the so at first I had the large, and yeah, I was just like, man, something about this bike is like, it's really good, but I'm just washing the front all the time, and I don't feel like I can go too fast on it. So I had the large, and I was like, maybe. And this is when like we're talking about this long reach thing now. Like at that time, Pivot was in the long reach category, but the reach on the size large was a 475 reach. So that was considered long, and I was like, oh, maybe I should be on the medium at 6'1". So I bought one. I tried it, sold my large, bought a medium, because I'm just like really trying to figure this out for myself. And then the medium was way better in the grip department, but then there's the reality of me being on this super short bike, and then there was like, you just don't have wheelbase to work with. And I hadn't done much enduro, but I showed up to uh, it was the EWS qualifier at North Star. And I remember being so pissed that they made us like race from like Tahoe Trail all the way down to like Lower Mountain on just like whack ass trails. I just like completely gave up. And it was from that mindset that I went on to Boondocks, like the downhill track at North Star. And then I had a run that I thought was like fairly uninspiring. And I was honestly just riding really loose, and I was like trying out funky lines. And um, yeah, I don't even think I like finished the race. Like,
Yeah, you
my...
like did that and quit. Like, what are you
yeah,
doing? Why'd you
like,
quit?
I think there's like some like not fun stages afterwards. So I was like, all right, I'm going home. And then you called me on the drive home, and you're like, Doug, I think you just won Boondocks. I'm like, bullshit. Like, and I don't know, to this day, I'm a little skeptical, but apparently I won the Boondocks stage like a handful, like a tenth or like a few hundredths in front of Richie and everyone else. And like, that's honestly the biggest head scratcher of a result to me, like to this day. But I think that's a trail where like that bike in the smaller size, it actually had pretty good corner grip, and it's not steep. So you don't need like a lot of comfort. You just need to like pick your way through the rocks. And yeah, I ended up winning that stage. But my overall feeling of the bike was still like, I don't feel like confident on it just because it's so small, even though it's better balanced. So then it was like, what is going on here? And then the Switchblade came out, and I rode the Switchblade on my local trails at Lime Ridge. And I was like, dude, this is like, this could be the best bike ever made. Dude, this is the best I've ridden on these trails. And like, I came into the first race that season thinking I was like hot shit. Like, I was like, that was the first year where I was like, all right, I'm going to take enduro racing seriously and see if I can do something with it. And at China Peak, I got smoked. I got like 22nd, 25th or something.
Something like that.
I had fantasies of podiums and stuff. Like, and I could not ride that bike, dude. Like, I think that's the thing about China Peak or like North Star or anything with soft dirt that isn't steep. Like, it just exposes the balance issue in your bike like so bad. Yeah. I don't know if like you can.
No, I can see that for sure. I mean, yeah, like, I crashed literally. Well, I clipped a pedal, or that was when I crashed out of the start gate at China Peak. Like,
oh, dude,
like
that was heartbreaking.
5 feet into the run, I was laying on the ground. It was pathetic. Like, I don't even know how it happened, but it did. And it was like, that's one of the only races in my life. Like, I'm going down a track. Like, what am I doing being here? And then, yeah, like, it was bad.
Oh,
that was,
man.
That was the beginning of a rough season of trying to race.
Yeah. I remember watching that happen.
It was from everyone, like literally everyone. And literally pedal out of the start gate. I think I clipped one of like the poles and just slapped, and it was just like, yeah, it was like, pretty pathetic. But yeah,
it's gotta burn. But yeah,
kind of like pick yourself up, like, oh, I gotta go ride down this track now. Oh, like,
yeah,
that was not, dude, yeah.
China Peak is sneaky gnarly, dude. That place is like proper. But
fun.
it is fun. It's a good race. Like, California has got it going on. Show up to China Peak, and that's a real enduro race.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went from feeling like totally hot shit on my home trails to being like scratching my head, completely lost. Like, no front end grip to be found, no confidence to be found, and like, yeah, just like accepted that I didn't have any speed there. And then we went on like fun, like alpine ride after that. Did you come with that? Were you there for that, or did you dip after the race?
Yeah. That was sick.
That was super fun, right? So it's like after the race, we're just like ripping with the homies, like just relax. And then I remember just being in a train and like having a fun time and like just following Evan, I think. And it was a bit dusty. And then, I mean, it was a corner that like shouldn't have been that big of an issue. And my front end just like disappeared on me. And I tank slapped hard, dude. And like,
I don't remember that.
But getting into like maybe concussion, another one of those where I'm just like, dude, did I just like slap my head for no reason? And like, it was those sorts of crashes where I was just like, dude, something with my bike setup has to change. Like, I can't be this bad of a rider where like I think everything's okay, and my front end disappears, and I slap my head on the ground, like with no warning. So
Yeah.
then going into the, so that's what, like, I feel like that crash was when I was like, all right, dude, is this a chainstay sort of thing? Like, I started thinking back to like my Yeti and like other bikes I had ridden up to that point, and I was like, at that point, it was just a theory, and I was like, dude, I like have to figure out if this is something real, because I literally can't keep hitting my head against the ground. I cannot keep crashing like this. So I went and bought a Banshee, because it was, I think at that point, one of the only bikes on the market with a reasonable reach and a really long chainstay. If you take a look at the geometry on the size large, it's a 450 chainstay, and you have the option to go 460. So I was like, okay, this is going to be my test platform to see if this theory is for real. And on the large, you can also see it's a 470 reach, so it's short. But the other thing that was right about that bike is it had a massive stack. The stack is huge compared to like most other bikes, and that's something we can get into later. But it automatically put the bars really high up, and like effectively, if you have a larger stack, like your reach, it equals out to like a longer reach, because you don't have to like add so much rise in your
Yeah.
stack
So
height that
much. Yeah. So many
ends up taking up the
spacers.
reach. And then I took that bike on our big 3 week race ride mission um, that we had together. And I mean, when I took that bike to Big Sky, I feel like that's where it clicked. You know, I rode that bike on local trails, and it felt wildly different. Um, I was still setting it up on our trip, and I made a few fork changes and stuff. But then by the time I got to Big Sky, um, I rode at that point. Like, I hadn't completed many races without crashing, and Big Sky, I rode consistently every stage. The bike felt comfortable under me. I was able to push. I didn't get arm pump at all, which was like something I had struggled with for a while. And yeah, all those like weird little things of like front wash randomness, like those instances vanished pretty much. Like um, when I was on the edge of traction, the rear end would step out, and like once I got a feel for that bike, that's when I really felt that the whole chainstay thing was for real. And then that led us to, what was it? Big White? What bike park in Montana was it?
Whitefish.
Whitefish. And then what really solidified it is we went to Whitefish, and at that point you had a medium Firebird that you had dialed
Large.
in.
It
That
was a
was a large.
large. Yeah,
Okay,
I had a large.
yeah. So you were on the large Firebird at that point, and I had this Banshee Titan, and we went to that bike park, and we did a bit of bike switching, and I think that's what solidified it for me. And I mean, I, you got on that bike and ripped.
Yeah.
We have some GoPro footage of just like, you know, these were like super high speed, crazy loose corners, and you were just like absolutely mobbing. And then I went from feeling like a total boss on the Banshee, and then immediately that front end vagueness came back on the pivot. So yeah, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had that same thing with the. There's also in the video from that trip. There's me tucking the front very hard on the pivot,
Oh
like
yeah,
pretty hard at Silver Mountain. Like I
yeah,
crashed so many times tucking the front. The thing with that bike that was weird, and like going back to it, like the medium was very rideable. Like one of our friends, we actually rode with him in Utah on that trip, had a medium, so I hopped on his medium for like half a run. Was like, holy shit, this is really good. Like it's just the balance factor was way better. Even though you're on a tiny bike, like it does ride and feel a lot better.
yeah.
And I was on a large just because it was the right like reach. I feel like 475 for like my height is a good place to be. It was what the bike I had previous to the pivot was. And like I will say with that pivot, the rear suspension was like incredibly good. Like that was basically why I bought that bike, is I came from the Stump Jumper Evo that was like the crazy slack, like basically a middle finger to transition. They were like, "Hey, we're gonna do this too," and like that bike was honestly pretty sick. Like the geometry on that Stumpy Evo, like the bottom bracket was crazy low, which was the only kind of weird thing. But it was actually a very well balanced bike, but the downside of it was the rear suspension. I was like, this thing is terrible. Like it was the worst riding rear suspension I've ever had ever. Like, so I was like, oh, I want to get the pivot. It's got super sick suspension, and like totally was like, geometry, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then got the Firebird, and then yeah, I was like, this bike's sick. Like it's insane. I can run anything over, and then like turning it was just a nightmare. And I tucked the front on that bike so many times. What was weird though is like it would either like wash or it would like start to wash and grab and then like overcorrect, and it did that to me a bunch, which is like when you're like trying to push and you're like sliding and it just grabs and like shoots off to the side. It was not fun. But yeah, so back to that was the bike I rode that whole season. And then yeah, like getting on that Banshee like first run was like, oh my god, like this is crazy. Like I was more comfortable on that bike 2 minutes in riding than like a whole season on the other bike. So it was like a very clear, like, okay, this isn't snake oil, like this works. And yeah, it was mind blowing. I was like, I can actually confidently go into a turn and not like feel like I need to slow down.
I've seen you ride a lot, right? When you hopped on that Banshee, I'm like, damn, Domen's back.
Yeah, it was funny. It was, yeah. And I mean, the funny thing too is actually that Titan's geometry is almost the same as what the Ransom E-Ride is. So like the e-bike I'm riding right now is essentially a Titan with more travel and a motor. So it's no surprise that I really enjoy riding that bike. And anyone like that bike's awesome. Like that Scott Ransom E-Ride, like I don't have. There's not many other e-bikes out there right now that I would consider purchasing. For me, that bike works very well. Although I will say the gas, that thing looks pretty good, which is funny because it's a dirt bike brand. But I mean, who knows who's designing the bike? But they put this total segue or offshoot tangent. They put plastics on the down tube and side of the down tube and they're replaceable, which I think is very cool. That's a part of the bike that might take damage. So if you have a replaceable, I mean, dirt bikes, you can replace your plastics if you mess them up, which actually this tangenting way out of here, but a homie and I talked about this like a long time ago. He actually had an idea for this quite a while ago. So it's cool to see that a brand is doing that. And yeah, that gas has, I'd say solid geo on this topic.
Yeah. I feel like that's where like some crazy long chainstays came into the picture is like e-bikes for just because of packaging issues or like
yes,
it's annoying that it's like not intentional, and then like we're like looking at it, we're like, damn, that thing's sick, and it's like the best bike we've ever ridden, and it's like an accident or like what people are kind of looking at as like maybe a negative.
Yeah, they're like, oh, that's a long chainstay. Why? And then, but the bike rides well. Why is that? Oh, it must be the motor and battery and the weight. Like, no, it's not. That
like,
helps.
Damn, this thing has a 460 chainstay. Like, sign me up.
Yeah,
and like that, because I think when we were riding, I think. Do you remember what chainstay I had? I honestly don't, because I went back and it was 460.
That big white fish.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. So when you chuck the 460 on the Banshee, dude, like, I don't know, it don't ride like anything else. Like, I think that bike with the 450 chainstay, it has a lot of front end grip, and its handling characteristic is like more similar to a normal bike, like how it bunny hops, like how it jumps, like everything feels super natural. But then like you put the 460 on and then it just becomes like a speed demon. And I feel like the difference between those two is like really dramatic. But
it's significant. Like it. Yeah, the 460 it's not very nimble, so to speak, and it takes the timing basically gets very different of like when you start a bunny hop or when you initiate moves on the trail or whatever, it becomes it's different, but once you get used to it, it's insane. Like I think people should be not afraid to go try more extreme ends of like say that type of geometry versus reach. I think it has less of a negative impact than what people might think. And
Yeah.
when you can just like, you never feel uncomfortable at speed, which is insane. It could also be like, that's what works with my body dimensions too. Like I also do have a little bit more of a rearward riding style than over the front. So I think that
Yeah.
plays into it as well.
Yeah. And it's like I think a lot, like the Noli that just came out, it's like the one reason they're going to such long reach is like, I mean, the way I understand it, it's for stability, but the long chainstay, it's like, I mean, in both those situations, like what's really giving you stability is the wheelbase. And even though the reach on the Banshee wasn't that long, it was pretty short, you still had that like massive wheelbase. And then you just get the benefit of front end grip, where if you put it in the reach, you, I guess, get stable wheelbase in a straight line. But you're just making the whole cornering situation a much tougher battle. So, yeah, I think it's like there's a lot of this like stability and reach conversation, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's more of a wheelbase thing. And then if you put it in the chainstay, you're just like, yeah, making the front end hook up.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the stability's wheelbase, and then like reach is just part of that. But
Yeah, it's just like
I
where do you
find
want your hands to be?
that a shorter, shorter than extreme reach. If you get a super long reach, this is a theory I have, is I call it arm travel. So if your hands are really far out, like if you look at Richie or any of the really good riders, they're able to basically have the bike come to their body, and they do that by using their arms and legs, so they keep their body very stable, but they're letting the bike move around beneath them. Sam Hill's crazy good at it too, obviously, but and like Gwyn too. Gwyn does a lot of like, his body doesn't move, but the bike is like coming up close. And if you have a super long reach, like you can't do that. Or if you like try to like press down off of like a undulation, like the bike, like your arms basically lock out and then like pulls you. So having a little bit shorter reach, I find actually is a lot more comfortable, and it allows you to place the bike more where you want. And then if you have adequate wheelbase, then you're getting the stability you need anyways, and having the ability to place the bike where you want. Like obviously if a bike's reach is too short, that's not good as well, because then you're like way over the front, and that's scary too. So it's like
Yeah,
finding the right balance for what works for you.
Yeah, we've both put ourselves in the reach too short camp too.
Yeah.
So I think the only reason the Banshee, the reach was acceptable and it worked really well, is because the stack was so high.
Yeah.
And someone can do the equation of like what the reach would be if the stack was like the same stack as an Enduro or something. But I would imagine they could be in like a fairly similar place. But the reach on the Banshee by no means, yeah, it just felt short. Like it felt really easy to ride. And yeah, that's kind of what solidified the whole chainstay thing in my head. I guess one thing that's interesting is we've both ridden my Geometron at this point, which I think kind of puts, I don't know, it's an outlier again in this whole conversation, but it almost, I think, is like a different, yeah, it operates in with a different theory of how everything works together, with a reach that long. But I think what you're saying with the arm travel, it's like that's kind of what you're giving up, with that bike, and you're kind of just more relying on the stability of the chassis and the grip of the bike. Um, and I think that's where preference comes into play. And it's something I'm interested in uh, testing with the next bike I have to test, which is the new Giroud, the V2. I got that in the S3, I'm pretty sure, which is a 475 reach, 450 chainstay. So I feel like that those are like the two camps that exist in my mind that I have experience with that like work. There's like super long reach, um, longer chainstay, more of just like a locked in body position, with what you're saying with arm travel, and then like the shorter reach, uh, longer chainstay where it's just a bit more dynamic. So yeah, I don't know if it's worth continuing the story further, but that's the whole reason why I ended up building, um, the pivot downhill enduro bike. Like, I think a lot of people might think that decision was purely just to have more travel because more travel is better, but being operating within Pivot's bike lineup, that was the bike with the longest chainstay. And, you know, again, the large fit in that same geometry we've been talking about. It was like 485 reach and a 442 chainstay. So it wasn't even like that
Extreme.
progressive or long, but it was way better than the enduro they had at the time, which or the Firebird, which everything was a 430 chainstay no matter what size. So that was the only way to get anything bigger than a 430 chainstay on a pivot at that time, and that's why I built the down duro bike. But yeah, Banshee, that bike is still out there. I did crack it, and I sold it to Nick unknowingly cracked. So we actually have
Yeah, that's
we're
funny.
pretty
I was all
familiar with
pumped.
this bike.
Bought that bike. I was like, oh, it's this thing up. It was just cracked up the back. I'm like, ooh.
So that
Yeah.
was the V2. Shout out to Banshee, I guess, for getting an updated version of that bike to solve that issue. I don't know, but they put a change into production targeted at that crack. So
I'm sure it wasn't the only one.
no, I knew plenty of people. There was actually like a pretty big contingent of like somewhat washed up racers riding Banshee Titans at that time. Like there was a bunch of dudes from the Northwest that the Northwest Cups that were on Banshee Titans. So that's kind of what turned me onto that bike in the first place too. But yeah, aluminum frame, pretty affordable. That's definitely like, I don't know. If I was like spending my own money on a bike right now, that's definitely one I would be pretty inclined to buy again. What other bikes are getting you excited these days?
I mean, I think a bike I'd like to ride and like have time to set up and get an idea if it's solid. I like that Norco range. I think that would be just it's intriguing because Evan rode one and raved about it. So and it's a high pivot. I guess I had a Canfield Jedi back in like 2011 that it was really awesome. Mine this is like a me issue is I set the suspension up to be a free ride bike and I didn't understand at the time like when you close all your compression and slow your rebound down, like it isn't good for running over bumps. Really good for jumps, but like I just didn't know. I was probably like 18 and not that smart, you know, like most 18-year-olds. And yeah, so like I didn't really get the full benefit of what that bike could do, and that was a me decision once again. Um, so it'd be cool to try a enduro high pivot. I think Norco is one of the first people to do that kind of thing, and yeah, I've pedaled a couple of them around, but they weren't set up to like what I would like, so it's like impossible to get any sort of gauge of what that bike could do or should feel like. That's one. I think that's one that just at some point it'd be cool to try.
Yeah, a quick note on did you try Evans at all?
No, I never got to pedal that bike around.
I rode like 2 laps at North Star, and this is when I had the pivot down Duro bike, the Phoenix, and it was funny because that was like literally a downhill bike that I had made into an enduro bike, and it was almost like my pivot was a trail bike trapped in a downhill bike's body, and then the range was like a downhill bike trapped in a trail bike's body. Like the range felt like more of a downhill bike than that pivot did by far. Like the pivot was really sprightly and you like you would get way more feedback and it was precise and efficient, and then like surprisingly so for a downhill bike. And then it just felt like a trail bike. And then I hopped on Evans and I was like, damn, this is for real.
This thing
Like
eats.
yeah, I was like, dude, this is like you can go downhill speed. Like there's certain trail bikes where you're like, I don't know. Most trail bikes definitely like there's a ceiling and it's more in like a trail bike category, but there's like that Norco is one. I mean, it's obvious they like I guess built it like dual purpose. The World Cup team raced on it for years. So
Yeah, so that's like I guess a current bike that have never really ridden that I'm like, I would like to. It'd be cool to put time on one. I mean, I think those raw. I
Ooh,
think
yeah.
raw Madonna is a
Yep.
solid choice. Like it's just a well-rounded. I think the guy that made that company either worked at Scott, which you can kind of see there. I mean, it's a 4-bar, intelligently done bicycle, and I think he's helping Nico Malali with his stuff
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
which is cool. Um, and also, yeah, I guess on this hug, Nico's trail bike, I'm sure looks really good. Like clearly, the guy races World Cups and knows what he's doing. So, um, yeah, I think like the raw bikes, they do a lot of their testing. Like probably ride the trail bike down Champery, which is like been there, done that, and like it's no joke. Yeah, like one run there, and you're like, good, we're going to Morgan's.
Yeah.
It's a little bit chiller, but even still, like Morgan's is no joke. Like, yeah, that zone of the world is like if you want to go really test a mountain bike, like that's real mountain biking. Like, like yeah, different world over there for sure. Yeah, so like those bikes, I think Nico, what I really like that he did with his trail bike, and this is something that no one in the industry really does, and I think is ass backwards, is when brands mullet a bike, they shorten the chainstay,
Oh god,
which
yeah.
in my like that's wrong. Like this is like so back to my e-bike. I keep talking about it because I like the bike. Okay, it's a good bike, but no. So like the Ransom E-Ride has like probably a 462 chainstay in the high setting, which is what you have to run it in when you mullet it. So I ran an Enduro as a mullet and I didn't really like it. And then the Ransom E-Ride though as a mullet is fantastic because just what the smaller wheel benefit is when you have a super long chainstay, like it really works well in my opinion. And if you look at what Nico did with his trail bike, it has, I think it's like a 455 chainstay,
Yep.
and it's mulleted. So like, yeah, like the just when you mullet a bike, like Nuke Proof for example, like they shorten the chainstay like 10 mil on their mullet bike or mullet mega or whatever, and it's like, well, like no, like you that why, and like you look at the Nuke Proof that Sam Hill was on when he was running the show. It had a long chain. It was like a 450. He had like a 450 reach and a 450 chainstay. And like reach is not the end all be all. Like it's not like it's like a front center, but like reach is a function of that. Like
Yeah.
from your reach, you get front center. It's it's a combination of reach and head angle. So like it is part of the equation. I'm not good at math, but that's one I can do. And so like yeah, like I just don't understand why brands do that. They put a small wheel and they're like, that means what we need to do is shorten the rear end. It's like, well, maybe you should have done the opposite and it's going to work better. At least
Yeah.
that's how I see it. Like when you put a smaller wheel on the back, like at least on that Ransom E-Ride, it's like it really helped with like making it not feel super sluggish. Like with a 29er back there, it is definitely like a little bit sluggish, but you can definitely haul the mail. That extra stability is there, but I'd like to I would rather have the rear end have a little bit more. I guess it's easier to place the smaller wheel, and
Yeah.
you having the little bit of extra ability to break traction too is fun, and it's not because you have so much stability or traction from the weight of the bike, and the suspension works really well because of the weight. Or I don't know, that's what I think at least, and yeah, so that's something just that seems to be a trend that I don't understand.
Yeah, I would say I have to agree. And I've never tried a mullet, but I'm really excited to try one on the Druid V2.
You have one on your head right now.
Yo, and I have tried it actually, but never on the back of a bike. So I'm excited to give that a try. But that's one I was definitely conscious of because yeah, I've seen the same thing. It's like, dude, I want to try this mullet thing, but I don't want a shorter chainstay. And yeah, the Druid's got a 450 chainstay with that mullet, so I'm excited to give that a try. And yeah, Nico's bike is probably on the top of my list. I mean, I think it's no surprise, and it just comes from a racer and a racing priority. So like all the stuff we're talking about is present on that bike. It's got a reasonable reach, a high stack, a 455 chainstay, which is like almost exactly where I would put it with my experience with the Banshee, like a little longer than 450, a little shorter than 460 something. That made the bike like a little bit harder to time. So, I mean, that bike gets me super excited. And without riding it, I'm like, dude,
The trail bike.
yeah. I mean, the downhill bike too. I mean, I'm jonesing for a downhill bike. Oh my God. But
well done.
That trail bike checks all the boxes for me. I really want to give that a try.
Yeah, I guess on topic of racer made bikes that are, I think that Contra
Ooh,
would be
yeah,
sick.
that's for sure one.
That'd be a sick one. I think,
yeah,
that listening to any podcast with Evan and sort of talking to him in person a couple times like that. Yeah, he knows what he's doing, and it's definitely like very obvious in what he's produced that it is well thought out. And I mean, if you've worked in a bike shop, and you've worked on a bunch of different bikes and raced bikes, kind of what to avoid.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I respect the hell out of what Evan's doing, and I think he's in a really good place with his bike. And I mean, it's gnarly, dude. He's running the show down there. Like I mean, I'm sure he's got help from people here and there, but that's a heavy lift, and he's got a World Cup team and everything. So I've talked to Evan here and there. I think I really wanted to give that bike a try before I left on this trip, but I think that's something will be able to line up when I'm back. And yeah, I mean, geometry looks good. Suspension's really interesting. And it's steel. So it's just got a bunch of cool things going on with it. But I think the design thesis and, you can just trust it a little, it's easier for me to trust that, the thing's going to rip. And some of the issues that we go on about are just like, I don't know. It just helps that it was designed by a racer. I feel like it's easier to trust.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess a bike I would be curious to ride is that Gamix.
Ooh,
I think it's
dude,
like everything different possible, and it'd be awesome to try. I think. Yeah, I haven't ridden a modern downhill bike either. I haven't ridden
oh my God,
downhill bike since 2016, but I can imagine that thing's pretty wild, just with everything going on. Like it, I think it's pretty cool.
I think an aspect of that, because that bike's gearbox, right? I definitely want to try a gearbox bike. I think everyone understands the concept behind it, but it would be really cool to try a bike that's like integrated that into its design. And I mean, for me, a downhill bike is like high on the priority list for the summer. Like it's just been too long and there ain't nothing like it. So I've been having dreams of dirt merchant laps and Schleyer on downhill bikes. Like
do the rock gap, and hopefully there's no one in the landing.
Nah, I think I'm.
That's retired.
I think I'm retired. List. I'll do the small one. The small one's fun, but the big hit, one? The big hitters off the list for sure. Yeah. We know how that goes. So
gnarly.
I think the list of downhill bikes that are exciting is a little longer.
It's like everyone pretty much.
Yeah, I think that's another episode maybe. But I think since it's a more race-driven product, the chains and there's probably larger constraints with longer travel that it just ends up this way anyway. But it seems like chainstay and balance is like less of an issue. Like it is weird and interesting to look at. Like you look at most downhill bikes, and I think reaches are getting longer, but like generally, even like the mainstream brands, like the reaches are much more reasonable. The chainstays are longer. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of funny. It's like, what if that set of principles works on the downhill bike? Like, why doesn't it apply to our trail bikes?
I don't know.
So
I don't have that answer.
Yeah, right.
Because long chainstays are not fun, okay?
Yeah.
You can't have fun with a longer chainstay. You're not allowed.
Apparently not. It's against the rules.
Another bike that I think is cool on this topic, that Nucleon. I just like weird bikes, okay? Like the weirder the better.
Yeah.
But I think I think it'd be a fun bike to ride. I think it just, I don't know, would be Yeah, I think it'll be pretty fun. I don't know about how. I think you could just run everything over on it.
The one with like without a derailleur, or
I mean, I guess it'd be cool to try, but
the derailleur in a different spot. Yeah.
I don't know. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I want to try them all, dude. I want to try them
yeah. I
all.
It would be cool to try like that drivetrain and see. I mean, I've never really had crazy issues breaking derailleurs. Like Pink
Yeah.
Bike just had that article of like how many derailleurs have you broken in 10 years? And
Yeah. What was your answer?
I I'm probably around 6. I basically go
Yeah.
through like maybe a derailleur a year.
I think
I
that's
mean, there's
about where I'm
seasons
at.
like I've not broken a derailleur, but I also use Shimano 11
I
speed
love it.
XT.
That yeah.
So
I feel like if I was running Shimano 12 speed, yeah, it just depends on what you're running. Because like, I think I was maybe in the one a year, maybe more, especially with downhill bikes. But like Axis doesn't really break.
no,
And yeah, same with those OG 11 speeds.
yeah, I
So
mean I think it was, I don't know, 2018. I went through like 3 GXs in like a month,
yeah.
that was bizarre. I don't know. That was probably user error, but
Yeah.
it did happen.
Yeah, if you're on mechanical 12 speed, your derailleur's days are numbered.
Yeah, like
I,
the thing was like touching the ground
yeah,
on
right.
like a
On a
27.5 bike.
27.5 bike.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the cage was like on the ground. So,
Yeah,
and
especially
sticks
if
like
you're
to
riding
find
in
their way in
Marin,
there.
especially if you're riding stick stackers.
Yeah, a lot of a couple of those. Yeah, like was it before TDS that year? I put like a brand new derailleur on, like second practice run straight into a rock. I'm like, and I didn't have a spare derailleur. Like this was early racing days for me, or trying
Yeah.
to race days, and it was just like the derailleur got worse and worse as the weekend went on, and it was like this is by the end of the last day I had to just push my bike because it
Yeah.
basically wasn't pedalable.
Yeah. I always care like I have this like Shimano Alpine single speed chain tensioner in my toolbox that's been there for like probably like a decade at this point. Just because of like I think it's a sick thing to have in the toolbox because like if your derailleur blows, at least you could punt
You
that
can
thing
make your
on
bike work.
and you can run single speed. But I've actually never had. I don't think I've. Maybe I used it once on a downhill bike, but besides that, like, yeah, when that question came up, I was like, I feel like I've broken a lot of derailleurs, but I guess I've always had a spare because I've never had to chuck the Alpine on.
Yeah, I mean that's like why I use the 11 speed XT is like I think that Shadow Plus or whatever their technology is, like the thing is like quite tucked away,
Yeah,
which is very nice. And then also like for whatever reason the material they're made out of, like you can smash it, it'll twist up, and you literally just like chiropractor your derailleur back into place, and you get a season out of those things. Like it's nice. Yeah, you just like you could see like those things be so twisted up and mangled, and you just like bend it back, and then so long as it's within like they're not very picky, it'll get through the gears.
yeah,
It might be a little rough, but yeah, it's yeah, the
yeah, you'll be able to
privateer
pedal.
program.
Yeah. Well, cool. I think the last thing I wanted to. Oh, well, before we move on to the next topic, I think the last bike that's like still super exciting to me and like one I would ride again in a heartbeat is the Dreadnought. Like, I think that made like really size specific chainstays like mainstream. Really, I mean, I'm not sure. Was Norco doing like actual proportional ones before that, but maybe not as long. I'm not sure, but
Well, didn't the dude from Norco start Forbidden? I think that was like someone
maybe
left Norco, went to Forbidden, and
yeah,
Norco was like early on to
early, yeah,
the size specific thing. I don't know if it was like on the like as far as I'm concerned, Forbidden does it very correctly. Like it is the same front ratio
yeah.
throughout the size run, which is like really cool. Whereas you look at say like Santa Cruz and it's like 2 mil different
I know,
between
man.
sizes. And it's like
That's
no, like that's a waste of effort. Come on, guys.
that's something we got to call out. Like, yeah, don't be calling it size specific chainstay when you're chucking 2 mils onto a chainstay
Like
that's
if you
already
had
too short.
20 to the front and 2 to the back. It's like, doesn't matter. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
it's so the bike shop dude can like go to the customer and be like, look, they're different, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
It's a buzzword. It's not actually like has a
In
very
that
small.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It's
Forbidden,
like
that shit's legit, but
totally. And like
um,
that's what puts the large at a 450 chainstay, and it's like, dude, and it's a high pivot. It's a super high pivot. So that's with no sag. At sag, it's probably
50,
457 or
yeah.
something. Like, and I think what's really cool is that somehow Forbidden, I mean, it's clear in their marketing. It's like, I think it's awesome that they've like marketed themselves as like a free ride bike, and like, which is like totally like against like all this short chainstay playful crap. It's like you see people absolutely ripping and doing crazy fun stuff on like a high pivot bike with a mega long chainstay. I mean, at least in the larger sizes, but even on the smaller sizes, they're proportional, which is awesome. Um, and yeah, I have a ton of experience with that dreadnought, and I don't think there's many bikes that I've ridden that I was like, I would buy that again, and that's for sure one. You know, it's not without its drawbacks, but like, yeah, that bike rips, and yeah, the super not even like that downhill bike. It's even the chain stays like they've picked like a different ratio that's even closer. It's like a 450 something for even shorter reach on that, which I don't know, it's badass.
Yeah, no, that's a bike like, yeah, I don't have much experience with, but it seems that like the amount of people on them is, shows that they're good. If it was a bad bike, you wouldn't see so many people on them. And like obviously you rode one, and as far as I'm concerned, was pretty problem free. And then like, our buddy Todd rides one, or I don't know if he rides one now, but he's ridden one for I think 2 years. I did a run on his bike once, and at that time I had the S4, and it was like, this is vastly superior. I mean, and you did that test last year, I think, with Vital that had
Yeah.
the two bikes, and it was very the winner was clear, and that, yeah, I think that'd be a fun bike to ride for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anyone say they didn't like that bike.
Yeah, right. It's
So
like you can say I feel like the two like yeah, the two things that you could maybe not like about that bike is the suspension just doesn't feel that supple ever. Like it plows through rocks, but it doesn't make it like the most comfortable. So you kind of have to like you know, you just got to be okay with like charging through stuff, and it's not going to feel like the most cush. It's more of a race bike sort of deal. And then yeah, it's not your time. Yeah, I like struggle with like the playful thing, because it's like you can play on it. It's just more what you were saying with like the Banshee. It's like your timing is different. Like your whole timing equation changes, and like things just don't happen as quickly. And like that's the maybe like why short chain stays are, I feel like, not as fun, is because things happen too quickly, and then things start getting like weird and unpredictable. And there's like that sweet middle ground where like I feel like that 450 chainstay on the Banshee really hit, where it's like, man, I feel like this bike is playful. I feel like it's super fun because I can trust it and still place it like really naturally. But
yeah, definitely.
um, cool. I think that's the last bike I wanted to cover. There's other cool ones out there, but we can't cover them all. I want to ride them all, so I ain't hating on anything necessarily. I'm be down to try
I'm
any
trying to think
bike
of if
out.
there's anything else that's, yeah, off the top of my head. I mean, I will
Yeah,
say that Paul Aston style like single pivot thing.
I
It looks interesting. Like I bet they were. Oh, Isak Leifson,
yo, dude, that
that
yeah,
downhill bike that he made that I think had like a 480 chainstay.
yeah,
And there's
dude,
GoPro footage of Austin
dude,
Hackett following him at Windrock.
going
If you
way
don't
too
believe in
fast.
long chainstays, watch that.
Going way too fast, dude.
He's like, the dude's an obviously unreal rider to begin with, but like clearly that bike worked for how he rides, and yeah, he was ripping and throwing some quality whips on that bike. And it's like, yeah, I honestly kind of think longer chainstays throw better whips because like you have that leverage to like get the wheel out there.
Yeah.
Not that I can't really whip anymore. It's like that's like a like I'm sure I
Dude,
could if I like worked at it, but like
you
back
just
in the
need
day,
another Whistler trip, dude. North
yeah,
Star
like I could
jumps.
get down back in the day. It's crazy to
Yeah.
say that, but yeah, like I think like on my e-bike, I feel like I can like get that thing's sick. Like, I'm sorry, all I talk about is e-bikes now, but it's like all I've ridden for like the last year. Because I've been uninspired, to say the least, to ride my acoustic bike. But yeah, we got a new one on order. Hopefully, it shows up at some point. But yeah, I just think the long chainstay thing. Like I had like on this is actually sorry going backwards. On my stump jumper, I could throw some whips. The Stumpy Evo, and it had a 445 chainstay, and like that bike actually was very well balanced front to rear, and it was sick to whip. And then when I was on my Firebird, I like couldn't whip. It was the weirdest thing because like I had a longer reach and like the leverage part of it, like trying to go do a whip with your hands out front and the rear wheels like under you, it's just weird. But then when the rear wheel's like way behind you, you can like throw the thing, and it's like, yeah, that's just like total side note of like watching Leifson throw that thing like
Crank
backwards.
nasty whips with a 490.
Yeah, but it's like more you're like in the middle of the thing, have more leverage.
Yeah.
You just like whop, and it's
it's like hard to articulate, but like I kind of understand what you're getting at. Like it almost feels like on a short chainstay, like
the wheel's like under you.
If you really crank it, like it feels like you're gonna get bucked or something, or you're gonna get like tied up in the bike,
Yeah.
like pretzeled up in a way that's like not gonna come back.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to like articulate, but I think I kind of understand what you're getting at.
Yeah. It's also, it could just be literally like leverage on the rear wheel. Like if you have like, yeah, it's just something that this is like looking back on like my own riding, like how I felt on different vehicles where you get on like a, that was something that blew my mind. I'm like, why can't I get this bike sideways? I swear I don't. I mean, maybe I got worse. It's possible, but
it's always possible.
Yeah.
What's the sickest whip you ever throw?
Utah on a V10 for sure. It's my Facebook profile picture and hasn't changed since. That's like my most proud whip moment. That jump was sick.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you?
Probably one day in Whistler on a TR500.
Yeah, that
was a good bike.
Those were fun bikes. Yeah.
Yeah, you could for the channel, you can look forward to an old school bike review of the TR500 coming up at some point. But yeah, I like that bike. It was really good. It was one of those. I mean, I'll get into it in greater detail, but I think it's one of those bikes that was like essentially good at nothing. Like it was
hella predictable.
Was not inspiring in any category. It was just good, and it was really predictable.
Vanilla.
Yeah, probably the most vanilla downhill bike, like linked single pivot.
But it did the job.
It did the job.
It was sick.
I mean,
I had one briefly, and like, crazy thing on this is I had an XL. It had a 440 reach.
Yeah. I can go into that bike some more, but I mean, that was probably the height of my speed on downhill bikes was on that bike until the back happened. But the day before the back, that was the fastest I've ever gone on a downhill bike by far. Had that thing. Shout out to Full Flow Suspension, Steve.
Vorsprung?
Sorry. Shout out to both those guys. Both those guys have helped me out. but Steve at Vorsprung, yeah, that was a really cool experience. I did a suspension testing day 2 days before I broke my back, and that bike worked insanely well. Like Charger damper suspension, Vivid Air, predictable bike that was like really well tuned, and yeah, I felt like I could do no wrong until I tried to manual off a drop for the 25th time. So RIP. All right. I think last topic, Well, I got you. We've beaten this chainstay thing to death, and I think we've theorized about why that's kind of provides a handling characteristic that both of us seem to like. And for me, that usually ends up being in the category of front end grip. But we were talking a little bit prior, and I feel like you have another theory on kind of like how a longer or shorter chainstay like affects the ride dynamic of the bike, like outside of kind of what we've already talked about.
Yeah. So basically, I'm yeah, I tried to it's hard this whole thing is like hard to fully explain verbally but on a bike you can totally feel it, and we touched on this concept for sure in the enduro review. And basically I made these things. This is ridiculous looking, but yeah, it's like you have the Enduro S4, the Enduro S3, and what I did is I scaled this is the wheelbase. This is a model. You have to bear with me. So like this is say that this center point of this is the bottom bracket, rear wheel, front wheel. And what you do with this is you put pens in it, and then you can like draw on paper. And it's not perfect, but what it does help to visualize is when you go through a turn, if hypothetically if wheels left like a paint line on the ground and you were to just ride a turn, you would see the line that each wheel draws. And this is something that I've felt while riding, and then it's hard to describe other than like on say the longer front end with the same rear end. Like it feels like your front end is wider, like it wants to run a wider line, which makes sense because it's farther out. But the drawbacks of that is that like say you're trying to like get your elbow up or like be in an appropriate cornering position, then it's just harder to ride. Or like the example I used in the enduro videos, you're going into say a berm and it feels like your front wheel is up higher because it's it has to run a wider line because the front end is longer. So that was what I tried to show. And like on paper, like it's basically like it'd be like your front, say the difference between an S3 and an S4. I just use these because they're two bikes I have a lot of experience with, and one's bigger than the other. So the difference in like front wheel, I don't know what the proper term is, but say wider, the difference between the wheels, I guess, or arcs in the wheels is about 50 millimeters, which is 2 inches. Which if you were to take your hands and move them like 2 inches over, that's kind of the way I think about it. So it's going to affect your like ability to basically control the bike. And yeah, so that's just like the thing. But then also the other way I look at it is say you're coming into a corner and there's rocks, roots, or whatever there may be, and you want to like what would happen with say the S4. This is backtracking to a previous topic that's been beat to death, but like you go into the turn and say there's like rocks kind of like on the inside or whatever, and you want to not hit them, and you end up like your front you'll get around and then the rear just plows into it because it's lower down. And that's kind of what I felt. Or like say on off camber, it's like you have to like fight off camber harder, or it's like harder to like get grip on off camber for me. I know people that ride bikes with short chainstays and long fronts on off camber very well, but that's just my feeling. Shout out Miles Morgan on that evil. He would do some crazy things, but he's also extremely skilled and talented. So that's like a counterpoint where it's like someone obviously can make it work, but maybe for his body dimensions or skills or ability. Once again, it's all personal preference, but at least when it comes to turning, that's what I feel is when the wheels are just in a different line, basically, or it's like the distance, and then
Yeah, once you kind of explain that to me, I feel like I understood that feeling in the riding with different bikes, like that feeling on corner entry where like on the longer reach, shorter chainstay bike, the rear wheel is like falling to the inside, and it's you have to like really be conscious of like popping up and like an over exaggerated hop to the outside to like carve that arc that you want to. And
Exactly.
I feel like it also contributes to like that jackknife feeling when you're like coming into something tight and like your front wheel, you're like setting up to turn, but your rear wheel is like drifting to the inside a little bit. And then there's like that moment that I talked about on the stem video, where it's like, if things don't work out how you want, like I think it just has a greater tendency to get that jackknife. And I think that's honestly where a lot of those front end disappearing moments come, is like you're out of line in front of the corner, then it comes time to do the thing and do the corner. And then it's like they're not carving a good line, and it's like there's a weird jackknife things that happen, and then it just disappears. And that like kind of compounds with like the different body position and weights that like the chainstay also like is involved with. But and without trying to dog on any one bike or brand, we messaged back and forth on like GoPro footage of the canyon. And I think this person was riding one of the larger sizes, and like you can see it in the GoPro footage for sure. Like the front wheel's up here, and it's just like it's not gripping and like cutting the arc ever. It just always seems like it's up high and outside of the corner. And like just watching the bike behave with that, it's just something I'm like way too familiar with. I'm like, I know what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's just the way I feel like it's like you're riding like two different bikes almost. It's like you're on like the rear wheel here, and like it's like say you're turning right. If you're turning right, it's just like you have to set up really, really wide, and then you're like, it's like you're riding with your handlebar. Like instead of like the bike being like, in between your legs, it's like the front wheel is like way out to the side, and then you're having to like, you're not able to like. Me personally, like I think what longer chainstays, like the feeling you get is you can like really ride through your feet and like drive with your feet, which is your legs are like twice as strong as your arms at least. So like, it's efficient, and it makes sense that if you can like really plant with your feet, and like going back to Sam Hill, like the dude rides with his feet.
Yeah,
like, you can watch how he's driving with his feet, and then just kind of like loose arms, and if you want to, the dude knows how to ride a bike very well. And like, yeah, that's like my biggest thing is you get on a bike with like short, like the less balance, and it's really, you can't ride with your feet because the front end is like way out to the side, and it's strange.
Yeah. You're just trying to difficult. You're trying to rein in the front end, and like, that just like puts more weight on your hands and stuff. And like kind of the counter example is like when I think back to, riding with the Banshee, especially, and the Forbidden, it's like, that whole concept of like the wheels just being in line, more in line. It's hard to describe, but it just seems to make sense. And like, I feel like I can feel that. And I think that just makes it like more predictable to hold the line. And I feel like it just makes you able to feel the traction a little bit better.
Yeah. No, and it's just easier to ride. Like it, and if it, like the front end will like go, but it doesn't like wash. Like that's at least like when I went from the Firebird to like the Enduro, like I could push so hard on that bike, and the front end would wash and like push, but it never would go. And it's way easier to manage that is when you know that that's what the bike's gonna do, because it's just pushing, which isn't great. But I'd rather have my front end like wash, or not wash, but like be pushing but still holding traction than pushing and losing
it's still
traction.
Gripping. It's not it's not disappearing. And like on the Banshee, especially with the 460 chainstay, because it just that going that much further makes some weird, it just makes the bike handle differently. And then there's like so much weight on the rear end, it's like almost washing for a different reason, is because it's like you're like actually putting too much force on the tire. but it's like that sort of wash is completely different than having no weight. And
Yeah, just overloading and what?
yeah, and like especially with the long chainstay, I had some of the longest front drifts of my life, but like those end much differently than the type of front wash that comes with no weight on the front wheel. And it's a much higher probability that you're going to ride those out um, and rein it back in. There's at least a possibility of reining it back in. And most times, if you're doing that sort of crash, it just ends with the low side. That slowly comes about. It's not like a boom, you're on the ground without even thinking about it.
Yeah, you don't just get shot from like a sniper in the woods and your front
Yeah,
end
dude.
just boom, gone.
Yeah, dude.
Hit the deck.
I'm over having those sorts of crashes, dude. I mean,
it hurts.
Yeah, it's brutal, and I mean that's that's part of the reason why I feel like I'm motivated to talk about this stuff is like, I've had too many concussions, and I'm not saying that every one of those crashes, like I definitely made a mistake and misjudged the bike, but I hit my head way more with those sorts of crashes on short chainstay bikes, and like that's kind of what led me down needing to figure this out. It's like I'm tired of hitting my head, and I feel what's funny is, especially as a pivot rep, I talked to a lot of people who rode Firebirds, um, in large, and I mean in all the sizes, all the bikes in all the sizes, and I would like be talking about these bikes as I was kind of working through this, um, and people would be like, "Dude, I love my Firebird," or "I love this bike with like this chainstay," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, really? Like, tell me more about it. Like how is it to corner for you?" And we would get deeper into the conversation. I'm like, "Oh, like does it feel like vague and like kind of hard to like predict?" And I'm like, they're like, "Oh yeah, like kind of in some situations." And then it's like what are your crashes like when you crash? Like, are they front washes? Do you get hung up? They're like, "Dude, all my crashes are front washes and they come out of nowhere." I'm like, okay, like, and it's just not something people like are connecting the dots with. And I had this other guy in at Skyline who I just like was pedaling up with, and he was kind of a newer rider. He was actually a really good kayaker, so someone who's like in tune with equipment and technique and body position, but he was new to mountain biking per se. And he's like, "I'm looking for a new bike, man. Like, what should I get?" He's like on this Trek Slash, an older Slash with like a 430 something chainstay and a long reach. And he's like, "I don't really want to get like a long bike with a large," and the guy's like 6'3". And I'm like, "Well, like, why do you say that?" Like, he's like, "Dude, I just really like this thing." And I'm like, "Well, how does it feel on flat corners?" And it's like same thing. He's like, "Oh, it's hard to predict. Like what are your crashes like?" He's like, "My front end just like goes on me." And then I've been like playing with my bar height, and I don't know. So I'm just like, yeah. And it's just interesting when that stuff comes up. And I think it's like that kind of awareness that's tough, because I feel like the marketing was so heavy for so long on short chain stays that it's not a thing that's like front of mind. And like I'm not, and I mean it's everything what we've just talked about. Like, dude, it took so long to even just like connect the dots on this. Like, you can't really expect the average person to just like know that if the companies are like marketing something different.
Yeah,
So it's like yeah, just going back, it's like, dude, that's why I feel like we rag on, or at least I do, about this stuff, is because like at the end of the day I feel like it ends in less crashes and less concussions. So
yeah. I mean, having a predictable bike is nice. It leads to a better experience, for whatever. Also, it's up to people to go experiment. I mean, it's tough though, because it's like
yeah.
bikes are not inexpensive. So
No.
how do you,
Yeah,
you can't
it's
go
really
buy.
hard.
I mean, well, most people can't go buy three mountain bikes and figure out like what works best for them. But
Yeah.
I guess try to put out information that can help inform people, and I guess go demo bikes.
Yeah.
Try to do your homework and demo bikes, and without buying bikes.
Yeah, yeah. I guess yeah, that's why it's fun to review them.
It's a good
So
time to buy right now, but selling's pretty rough.
If you got cash in the bank and you're feeling good, you're gonna get some deals, man.
Yeah, there's some good prices out there for sure.
Yeah, we could get into that topic, but I think with that, that's a good place to end. Yeah, thanks for hopping on, Nick. I'm sure we'll do this again. We got plenty of more things we can wrap out on, and yeah, maybe when downhill racing starts going, we can chat about some racing.
Armchair experts.
Yeah. Never raced a World Cup, but I'll tell you about one. That's for sure.
Hell yeah.
Thanks for coming on, dude. Thanks for anyone who's made it this long in the podcast. That'd be pretty incredible. But yeah,
amazing. If you made it an hour and a half listening to this, wow.
Props to you.
Hopefully you're entertained. And maybe you learned something. I mean, granted, all this is like definitely opinion based. With at least there's some experience behind it. It's not just purely out of the ether. So.
Yeah. Sweet, dude. Thanks, Nick. I'll catch you next time. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching.
Go get a taco.
Yep. Taco time. All right. Peace.
Later.